During World War II, Japan was so brutal that even today, Japanese scholars and diplomats have difficulty admitting these atrocities actually happened. The atrocities are so rugged that it is almost impossible to comprehend them. Although it is not often discussed, the Japanese committed some of the most sadistic and evil acts in human history. Some World War II experts even argue that they were even more brutal than the Nazis. Before we get into this video, I wanted to warn you guys, this stuff is pretty disturbing, so viewer discretion is advised. The Japanese master race. First, we should understand how the Japanese have achieved such a level of brutality. Unlike the Germans who focused their war crimes on a specific group of people, the Japanese were not selective. They would kill anyone who was not Japanese. White, Russian, Chinese, Mongolian, Korean, Indian, or Thai. Didn't matter. All thanks to the Japanese master race idea, children were taught that Emperor Hirohito was a god from the adolescent level. School teachers would force Japanese ultra-nationalism and extreme Chinese racism. When you grow up, you'll have to kill 100, 200 chinks, one Japanese teacher used to say. The Japanese military believed in the Bushido Code, the way of the samurai, and viewed the war as a crusade to save the rest of the Eastern world. It carried out an infamous 3-all extermination policy throughout its military campaign. Loot all, kill all, burn all. Unit 731. You were the most unlucky person on Earth if you were sent to Unit 731. A Japanese group of scientists held animalistic experiments on humans, including vivisection, which dissected human bodies without anesthesia. Thousands of Chinese, Korean, and Russian people, both men and women, were infected with syphilis and the plague inside the laboratories. People had their organs removed for examination while still alive to study the effects of the disease. Things were much worse for female prisoners. They were viciously raped so the weapons and trauma experiments could be tested on them and their kids. Scientists didn't really bother with control groups or large samples. It was just pure evil. What happens if we throw a woman out in the snow while she's pregnant? What if we infect a woman with syphilis and then open her up to study the fetus? Those were the things the scientists did in these Japanese laboratories. None of the prisoners from Unit 731 survived their confinement. You might be wondering, what happened to Unit 731 after the war? Nothing. The scientists involved in Unit 731 were given immunity by the US for the data they gathered through human experimentation. The Rape of Nanking. The Rape of Nanking is one of the most infamous massacres of World War II. 200,000 Chinese soldiers, including 20,000 to 80,000 Chinese women, were killed. The rapes included the elderly, children as young as 10 years old, and virgins, who would often have to satisfy 20 Japanese soldiers at a time. They grabbed the baby and killed her by smashing her onto the ground, said one of the Nanking survivors who shared his memories. Pregnant women were rammed into bayonets, men were set on fire, and baby skulls were crushed. The massacre was a game for the Japanese troops, who were often encouraged by their officers to invent more and more horrible ways to slaughter the Chinese population. The Germans had the SS, while the Japanese had an entire army committed to evil. It's so strange that the average person outside of China and Korea knows almost nothing about the Nanking. One author, Iris Chang, even wrote an influential book called The Rape of Nanking, The Forgotten Holocaust of World War II. After 7 years, she killed herself because no one still cared about the massacre after she published the book. Sex slavery. Surprisingly, no punishments were ever handed down for the crimes committed during the sack of Nanking. However, the Japanese High Command did take note of the international outrage and the disastrous turn of public opinion that their actions caused. Thus, to prevent another mass rape, senior commanders established special military brothels to help soldiers keep their distance from local women. Female inmates were taken from occupied territories and taken to remote locations to serve the troops. Some were told lies about easy work as domestic servants, others were simply kidnapped. Once women got to their destinations, they were held as prisoners. Soldiers had 1 day off a month to visit the brothel, and inmates were punished if they didn't enthusiastically please their customers. Comfort stations were attached to all the large units, and they would move with the front. Although sources disagree about the number of victims, Japanese historians claim that only about 20,000 women were abducted in this way. However, a joint project between the Chinese, Taiwanese, and Korean authorities estimates it was actually close to up to 400,000. The Bangka Island Massacre. When the Japanese took over Singapore, Allied forces left the island. Japanese planes bombed the sea to sink as many fleeing transport ships as possible. One such boat was filled with 65 Australian nurses, and 53 of them managed to swim to the small island of Bangka after their ship had sunk. Unfortunately, it was controlled by the Japanese soldiers, who brought together as many people as possible, injured servicemen, Allied soldiers, and some nurses. The Japanese set up a machine gun on the beach and ordered everyone to walk into the shallows, shooting them all down. Only 2 people survived the incident. The Sandakan Death March. The Sandakan Death March is little known, although it is considered the worst military atrocity in Australia's history. The incident occurred at the end of World War II when the Japanese were fleeing. They left the Sandakan POW camp in Borneo and forced the soldiers kept there to march through the jungle with them until inmates died of starvation and diseases. Any soldiers who actually made the entire trek were executed by the Japanese. Only 6 survived the march of the 2,700 prisoners of war at the Sandakan camp. Cannibalism. From late July to early August 1942, an entire division of Japanese soldiers tried to force a tricky crossing in New Guinea, rugged Central Highlands. They were fighting a few companies of Australians who managed to halt the advance and drive it back from the mountain pass. When the Australians searched the abandoned Japanese camp for prisoners they had lost in the fighting, what they found shocked them. The Japanese had cannibalized the wounded and dead soldiers. Corpses were found with meat stripped off their legs and half-cooked meat in the Japanese dishes. Dumps with rice and a lot of tinned food were found. This means Japanese soldiers weren't even hungry and didn't lack food when eating their prisoners. Several first-hand accounts claim that the Japanese officers, even senior ones, participated in ritualized cannibalism. After the Japanese surrendered, information about this practice became known among war crime prosecutors. Still, gentlemen's agreement among investigators prevented the release of these stories out of consideration of both the dead prisoner of war families and the difficult reconciliation between the United States and occupied Japan. What Japan did during World War II was extreme, evil, and brutal, even for wartime. Although it is not correct to say what the Germans did was outdone entirely, there's something exceptional about the Japanese war crimes. They seem beyond comprehension. Complete removal of any humanity. For some Japanese soldiers, kicking a baby was like kicking a soccer ball. A Nanking survivor in a published testimony says, "One of the other Japanese devils saw my baby brother bawling on the ground and skewered him clean with a bayonet, then picked him up and tossed him away." We should understand that Japan in World War II and Japan today are totally different. Obviously, the Japanese nowadays are not evil, but what their country did during World War II should never be forgotten, but taught in every public school. Although it seems better to forget this terrible history, it would be a dishonor for those who suffered and perished. Looking at the worst of Japan's crimes in World War II also helps us understand today's world a little better, especially the animosity Korea and China still have for Japan. Moreover, we must learn and remember the horrible crimes in our recent history to make sure they never happen again. Germany became a better place because Jewish people have not allowed the country to forget what they did during World War II. As the saying goes, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it.